Yes, I'm delighted to be joined by Robert Zubrin, who is the founder of the Mars Society, also the author of a number of books, including The Case for Mars and The Case of Space, I believe, which is the one right behind you. Uh,
Yes.
so say thank you very much for your time. Now, the first question I was thinking, obviously, the book A Case for Mars, which is kind of how you became kind of shot to renown. So that was published in 1996. I mean, do you think
Right.
there's been more or less progress than you would have expected in terms of Mars colonization since then?
Well, I would have hoped for more, but we have made some progress. Um, in terms of the official Mars program, all the progress has been on the robotic exploration front. Okay, and that's been quite substantial. In fact, it's been epic. We've had a whole string of successful Mars missions. But if you consider that the last successful Mars mission before 1996 was Viking in 1976. Okay, but then in 96 we had Pathfinder and Mars Surveyor. And then we had two failures in 99, but then a success in 2001 with Mars Odyssey, Spirit and Opportunity in 2003, two great successful missions, the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter in 2005, Phoenix in 2007, the European Mars Express in 2004, the Maven, Curiosity. Now we have the Trace Gas Orbiter, set for another big rover to launch this year, and a European one was going to launch this year, but now moved out 2 years because of the epidemic, disrupted preparations. But still, quite a run, and almost all of them successful, and which is also quite something, and major discoveries, including discovering glaciers on Mars, pure water ice as far south as 38 degrees north, which is the latitude of Athens or San Francisco on Earth. I mean, so we're talking, very much into the mid-latitudes, not polar ice at all. The Europeans discovered an underground liquid water lake. So we have now found environments on Mars in which there could be extant life, as well as places on Mars where there is tremendous resources for future Mars settlement. Now, in contrast to the very successful robotic Mars exploration program, the human programs of the official space agencies have stagnated. They had been stagnated already, I mean, since the 1970s, when we pulled back from the moon to low Earth orbit, and we weren't past there in 96, and we're not past there now. And this is because I think that the robotic exploration programs, the science programs, have remained purpose-driven, while the the human spaceflight program, in the absence of a clear goal, has become largely vendor-driven. That is, a purpose-driven program spends money to do things. A vendor-driven program does things in order to spend money, and so they've drifted. But precisely because of the failure of the official government-led human spaceflight programs, as well as new launch vehicle development programs to accomplish much, nature pours a vacuum, and a new force has moved in, and that is the entrepreneurial space companies. Of course, exemplified most forcefully by SpaceX, which has now proven that it is possible for a relatively small, well-led entrepreneurial team to do things that were previously thought that only the governments of superpowers could do. And not only that, do them in 1/3 the time at 1/10 the cost, and even do things they had deemed impossible altogether. And as a result, you not only have this extremely impressive SpaceX capabilities rapidly developing, but they have set off an entrepreneurial space race. And you have, and not just among fellow billionaires like Musk and Bezos and Richard Branson, but working engineers like the Rocket Lab team, which is based in New Zealand. These are middle-class people who've nevertheless mobilized hundreds of millions in investment, and they've reached orbit. New Zealand has reached orbit, even though New Zealand doesn't have a space program. Okay, and so this is the power of free enterprise let loose, and I think we're going to see a lot more of this. I'm sure we're going to see a Chinese equivalent to SpaceX. I know there are people there trying and who've gotten some substantial investment. They're on the move, and maybe in many other countries. So this is going to cheapen the cost of space launch a lot. It already has. In the past 10 years, SpaceX has caused a drop in the price of delivery to orbit by a factor of 5, which is after it had been flat for the previous 40 years. And if Starship is successful, their current launch vehicle, it'll drop it by another factor 3. So we've gone from $10,000 a kilogram to $2,000 a kilogram, and we're looking at, within a few years, $700 a kilogram.
Yeah.
And that's going to change a lot of things.
I mean, do you think this competition is key to kind of speeding up space exploration? So in the same way that competition between the USA and the USSR was kind of the engine behind the original space race, do you think that the competition between US, China, other countries, and potentially even private enterprise will kind of be the engine behind the next round?
Well, okay. In the 60s, of course, we had extremely hard-driven competition between the United States and the Soviets, and that unquestionably was a major force in driving the progress of the space program. And in a way, when in the 80s or 90s, when the space programs agreed to collaborate on the space station instead of competing to see who could build the best space station, it really took a lot of the energy out of the program. Be as if in the Olympics people had decided, look, why don't we just decide right now who's going to win the high jump, who's going to win the pole vaulting? You can have the long distance, we'll have the short distance. That would really, take the fun out of it and the drive out of it. And I think that, by the way, an Olympic spirited space race is a good thing. I think even in the 60s, it was the most healthy part of the superpower competition. And, I was actually in Leningrad when we landed on the moon. And because I was a little chess master, and and all the Russians I knew, okay, which were ordinary people, not people in government.
Yeah.
Okay, they were chess players, but still, just regular people. Молодец. They thought it was great. We had excelled at a sport that they could appreciate, and it certainly sent a very positive message about America. Now, in terms of the current age, there are two different forces driving competition in space, and one is free enterprise space race, and that's the healthy one. And that's a really good thing, and I think it's going to make it possible to have humans on Mars before this decade is out, actually. Okay. Now, the other is, well, it's not good, but it's there, and it's undeniable, and it's going to play a role, which is military space. Okay. Now, and when I say it's not good, what's not good is that there is military competition, and in general, the fact that this military competition has moved into space as such, I do not regard as an evil. I mean, if you're going to have a war, I can't think of any better place to have it than outer space. But but I'd prefer not to have a war. Now, but let me talk a little bit about this, because this needs to be understood, and it's not well understood, and in some cases not even in military circles, although in some it is. I believe that space superiority is now the decisive element in warfare. just as air superiority became decisive in World War II. The war was won on the ground, but who controlled the air decided who was going to win on the ground. And the and it's the same way now. I mean, if you could imagine, imagine World War II, but with the Axis powers having just one of the current space capabilities, say reconnaissance satellites, all right, which is only one of several very important space capabilities. If they had had reconnaissance satellites, the U-boats would have won the Battle of the Atlantic. Britain would have been starved out. The Japanese would have won the Battle of Midway. They would have seen our carriers long before we saw them. They would have launched a strike, sunk our carriers, no air cover. The rest of the ships would have been sitting ducks. That's it. Okay. And so, you know, even a mismatch, I mean, imperial mismatch was a real, Imperial Japan was a real mismatch against the United States in terms of industrial capability and any metric. Okay. They would have won had they had space superiority. And so, and then today, it's not just reconnaissance satellites, of course. All the communications go through satellites, the ability to coordinate and command forces, the ability to target weaponry, GPS-guided munitions can be hundreds of times more accurate. So an artillery piece with GPS-guided munitions can get as many hits as 100 artillery pieces without them. And so it's decisive. And so there's going to be a real competition. There already is, but it's going to become much more extreme. Because nuclear weapons have neutralized themselves. No one is willing to use nuclear weapons for any other reason than existential survival against a nuclear attack by an opponent. You know, neither the Russians nor the Americans are going to want to have a nuclear war over Poland. Okay, it's not happening. It's too extreme. But if you could knock out all the enemy satellites, then your conventional forces will win. And so I think we're going to see fighter satellites, not just anti-satellites like the Russians and Chinese are currently introducing, but but fighter satellites that can protect our own satellites. That this is what we're going to see. So we have the entrepreneurial space race, which will determine all space capabilities, both civil and military, and then we're going to have the actual military competition. Now, it's my hope that the military space race will put pressure on, for example, Russia to reform in order to compete. That is, why is there no Russian SpaceX right now? They certainly have the technical talent, and there are pools of capital owned by people who have greatly interested in space. But it wouldn't make sense to start a Russian SpaceX right now, because if you did and it was successful, it could be stolen by some oligarch in the Kremlin right from under you. Why make something that somebody else is going to steal? So, you know, reform is necessary if they're going to compete. And if they do have a rule of law in Russia, then maybe all of a sudden we'll discover there's nothing to there's no one has an enemy. There's no enemy.
Yeah. that would be good. I was very interested by you saying that you think that we'll have an astronaut landing on Mars by the end of 2020s. Because I mean, my understanding is that NASA is aiming to put an astronaut on the moon for 2024, or potentially one on Mars 2033. But even that's a bit ropey. So I was wondering, I mean, do you think it's going to be one of these?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be NASA. No, the NASA has no real plan to send humans to Mars right now.
Yeah.
The thing that they're talking about as a Mars program is a human Mars program is a joke. It's not a serious plan. It's in fact just an excuse to spend money on a variety of technologies that they need an excuse to spend money on. But Elon Musk is serious about getting to Mars.
Yeah.
And I was just down there, and I met with Musk in Boca Chica around a month ago, and I saw what he's doing. Now, he's not just building a ship; he's building a shipyard. Okay, his philosophy is he's going to build scores of starships, eventually hundreds, even perhaps thousands of starships. But for starters, scores of them. And he's prepared to take losses. His philosophy is build it, fly it, crash it, fix it, try again. And he's not going to spend a decade analyzing this thing.
Yeah.
Now, they've had a number of failures in the past month. I think they could slow down a little bit in order to fix things, but they've got the right philosophy, um, and they're pushing ahead. And um, you know, Musk, of course, is very optimistic in the way he projects things. Last October he had that event in Boca Chica in which he introduced the first Starship prototype, and he said we'll make it to orbit by 6 months, which is now this month, and that's not happening now. At that time, I angered a bunch of Musk fans by putting out my own view, which was that they're going to make it into orbit, but not in 6 months, in 2 years.
Yeah.
And so, that's a lot slower than what Musk projected, but it's a lot faster than what anybody else is actually doing or ever has done. I mean, even the great von Braun team, which was a great team, okay, they cut the contract for the Saturn V in 1962. It flew in 67. That's 5 years. Now, that's good. I'd settle for that. But Musk is going to beat that. And we're going to have starships flying to orbit certainly before the next election in 2024. And if we have starships, which is basically something with the same capability as a Saturn V moon rocket, but reusable, same lift capability, but 1/10 the cost. Okay. If that's flying in 2024, somebody's going to be elected president in 2024. And then he or she is going to look at that and say, look at this. Look at that. Could we use that and get people to Mars by the end of my second term? And the answer is going to be yes, we can. And the biggest tall pole has been knocked down already. And will it cost hundreds of billions of dollars? No. Tens of billions of dollars? Maybe about $10 billion. Well, then why not do it? Let's do it. Let's seize the time. And so by making this thing practical, Musk is going to make it sellable.
Yeah.
And at that point, we'll have, I believe, a public-private partnership, because there's some things that we do need NASA to come to the table with. For instance, we need surface power that's more reliable than solar power, and so that means a nuke. And the materials to make space nuclear reactors are under tight government control. And so you do need to have government participation in this. But we can meet Musk halfway. In fact, probably only have to meet him about a third of the way. But still, why should this be his entire responsibility? We should play our part.
Oh, even the NASA plan, as I say, seems to be to go to the moon in 2024, and they seem to be of the view that will speed up the process of going to Mars. So I think Jim Brimstein said it would be a proving ground and an accelerator of the process of going to Mars. I know that's a bit controversial. I know there's some people think we should go straight to Mars, including President Trump, interestingly, in one tweet. I was wondering where you stood on that. Did you think that the moon is essentially a distraction, or is it a kind of integral part of getting to Mars?
You don't need to go to the moon to go to Mars. And if you want to get to Mars as fast as possible, you go straight to Mars. This is why Elon Musk is not talking about building a moon base, let alone a moon orbiting space station before he builds a moon base. Okay, but if NASA actually returns to the moon, I think that would do a lot to restore NASA's can-do spirit. So while it is not technically necessary to return to the moon before you go to Mars or before NASA, it may be morally necessary, that is in the sense of morale, for NASA to do that, to we're not going to base Mars missions from the moon, and the plans that NASA is currently circulating to base Mars missions at the lunar orbiting space station are frankly detrimental to any Mars mission. It puts an imposition on Mars missions, demanding that they base themselves at this absurd space station in order to go to Mars. But they're just doing that because they want to make the lunar orbiting space station appear to be necessary, because they want to spend money on it.
Yeah.
That's what I mean by a vendor-driven program. But once you have this prospect of humans to Mars, within my administration, the administration elected in 2024, they will look for the simplest plan. They will not look for the plan that is the most complicated and gives the most people something to do. They will look for the plan that gets us there as quickly, as efficiently as possible. Okay.
Yeah.
And so all this nonsense will be thrown out the window once the goal is truly embraced.
Yeah. I mean, so essentially, it will be the commercial aspect will make it possible.
Yes. I mean, you take the SLS, okay? Now, I was actually on the team that did the preliminary design of what is now called SLS in 1988. In 1988. Okay, now, it's 32 years ago. And at least half the people working on that program today weren't even born yet when the preliminary design was done. And furthermore, that preliminary design, which is still essentially the current design with very minor modifications, was based on shuttle technology, which was developed in the 70s. And because all SLS is, it's a shuttle-derived heavy lift launch vehicle, uses the external tank, couple of solids. It's got 4 space shuttle main engines, except instead of being attached to an orbiter on the side of it, they're put right under the tank. And that's what it is. And then an upper stage on top, and with a hydrogen-oxygen engine. And there is nothing to this. And when we proposed this in 1988, we did not think, oh, this is the greatest launch vehicle anybody could ever design. This is no. We said, this is the dumbest launch vehicle anyone could design. This is something that is so easy to do because it's just the shuttle without the damn airplane, okay, that we should be able to have this flying by 1994, no sweat. This is a much less innovative vehicle than the Saturn V was, or than the space shuttle was. And now the space shuttle, which included all of this stuff as well as the orbiter, only took 10 years to develop. Now here we're taking a simplification of the space shuttle, and it's been 32 years, and they haven't flown it yet. And why is that? Well, the reason why the Saturn V flew within 5 years of program start is because it needed to. If you were going to make it to the moon by 1969, you needed to have the booster flying by 1967, and so that's exactly what they did. The tragedy of SLS isn't all the delays that it's had. It is that it hasn't mattered that it had those delays, because there's been no driving program saying we need this, you gotta have it. If there had been a program to have humans to Mars by 1999, which we could have had, then SLS would have been flying by 1994. There was absolutely no reason why it couldn't. But the President Bush, the first, he sees this stuff happening. And in 89, because he didn't become president until 89, he got up on the stairs of the National Air and Space Museum in Washington with Armstrong and Aldrin and Collins behind him, the Apollo 11 cruises. This is the 20th anniversary of the Apollo moon landing. That was great. That's what America is all about. And therefore, I, as president, am committing us to go back to the moon and on to Mars, and this time to stay. It's great stuff. So NASA was commissioned to go off and do a report on how they could do this, except that unlike Apollo, where there was a clear goal, Bush, unlike Kennedy, did not really specify it. And the dominant factions in NASA at that time was the shuttle program people and the space station people. And what they said is, well, this moon program is fine so long as the launch vehicle is the space shuttle and it needs a space station. And they put a requirement that in order to go back to the moon, it had to be built at a orbiting spaceport, which would be a greatly expanded space station using multiple shuttle launches. And so you got, instead of this up and away with Apollo, you got this thing where every moon mission required 4 shuttle launches, as well as having, before that, built this gigantic space station with hangars and cryogenic fuel depots and construction shacks, so kinds of stuff. And in 1989, there were plenty of people in NASA who had been in NASA during Apollo in 1969. Okay?
Yeah.
It was only 20 years later. There was plenty of them. People who had sent people to the moon were still in NASA. And they looked at this mess and they said, if we could put a man on the moon, why can't we put a man on the moon? And and the reason is because they had this imposition on them of this vendor-driven program. And so if you're going to make it to Mars, you have to be purpose-driven. You can't be controlled by people who are looking to impose their bills on you. It's like trying to run your company with your vendors determining your purchases. Okay, so we've decided that this month you're going to organize 1 million quarter-inch tubes, and how are you going to do it? If you have a sane program, you decide what you're going to buy.
Yeah.
Vendors don't decide what you're going to buy.
I mean, you kind of alluded to this, but do you think, therefore, the main obstacle to putting a human on Mars has been political / budgetary rather than scientific?
Yeah, it's been entropy. And in the absence of a clear goal, government programs can accomplish incredible things if they really have a clear goal. And they're driven towards that. If they don't, they drift. And the more they're funded, the more they drift, because the more interesting the program is for people who are interested in money, of which there is no shortage. And this is why, by the way, it is the human spaceflight program that has become much more vendor-driven than the science program, because there's so much more money involved. In other words, we didn't land rovers on Mars in order to give business to the airbag companies. And and if the airbag companies or their competitors had put up a fuss about how the mission was being designed because it wasn't including their things, people would have just said, oh, shut up. Okay. I mean, compete for it. Good luck. But we're not going to bring this into Congress to determine which of these little vendors are going to get funded.
Yeah.
Okay. There's a little of that goes on, but it doesn't run the show. And whereas in the human spaceflight program, okay, when there's billions or tens of billions involved, so there's major political decisions. And so you have Senator X saying you must use this technology in this program. We require it. So right now you have Senator Shelby from Alabama, imposing SLS on this program instead of Starship.
Yeah.
and even trying to impose SLS on the Europa Clipper mission, which is a robotic science mission to Jupiter. And we'll see if he can get away with that. But you can't have that. And in Apollo, there were people who tried to do that. In fact, if I can tell you a story, it's a very interesting story.
Yeah, no, please.
It's told by the historian Howard McCurdy, who's a noted space historian. And this is a meeting that occurred at the Marshall Space Flight Center around 1963. And at this time, the Johnny Hopel, who was this maverick in NASA, had proposed the lunar orbit rendezvous strategy as the way to do the Apollo program. And initially, he was considered to be a wacko, but by this time, he had some support. He was one of 4 important factions on how to do this. So there was the lunar orbit rendezvous people. Then there were the people who wanted to do the mission all up using a Saturn IX, almost twice as powerful as a Saturn V. You can't go to the moon. Lunar orbit rendezvous is stupid. It's complicated. Just build a bigger booster, much bigger booster. But then you can go to the moon. And then you had the nuclear rocket people say, well, you don't need a Saturn IX. You can do a Saturn V so long as you got a nuclear upper stage. Okay, so but then you can't go to the moon unless you have a nuclear rocket. And then you had the space station people who said, well, you can do it, but you have to assemble it on orbit at a space station. So all these guys were saying, you can't do your program until you do my program. Okay, that's what it all boiled down to. Well, anyway, so they're having this big food fight over there in the Marshall cafeteria over this. And and then finally somebody said, look, do we really want to go to the moon or don't we? Yeah. And there was dead silence for 30 seconds. And then they all looked around and said, it's got to be LOR. It's got to be lunar orbit rendezvous. Because the imperative was so strong that it pushed these diversionary programs out of the way.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's what you don't have now. And this is why Trump is not going to make it to the moon by 2024. Okay. Even though, for the past 2 years, I've been saying, get this lunar orbiting space station out of your mission architecture. This is ridiculous. You don't need it. Are you serious about going to the moon? Now, just now, they did appoint a new person in charge of the program, and he said, we're taking the lunar orbit space station out of the critical path. But they're not taking it out of the funding request. Okay.
Yeah.
So the issue is, you're not going to force the lunar mission to use this space station, but where's your money going? Is it going, if you want to land on the moon, you need a lunar lander. Is that fully funded, or are you building the stupid space station that has no purpose at all? So that would not have been tolerated during Apollo.
Yeah.
Okay. In fact, it never even crossed anyone's mind that they needed a lunar station before they landed on the moon. But so they got to get this straight. And then this business with Mars, where they said, well, we got to have a lunar orbiting space station and a Mars orbiting space station before we go to Mars. This is just nonsense. Okay. And none of that can be placed in the critical path of a Mars mission.
Yeah. I mean, I've noticed that the Mars Society isn't just interested in putting an astronaut on Mars. You also want to colonize it. I mean, I think you've got a competition going at the moment to a 1 million person human settlement to kind of to design it and that kind of thing. I mean, how important do you think it is kind of the future of the human species that we become a multi-planet civilization?
Well, I think it's very important to the future, and it's very important to the present concept of the future. Okay. Let me actually talk more about the second than the first, because it's more here and now. Because you say, well, okay, it would be grand if 200 years from now there was human civilizations on Mars and on planets orbiting other stars. That would be grand. But why does it matter to me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Other than having an understanding that I participated in creating something grand, which is not to be dismissed. But here's why it matters. It matters because ideas have consequences. And our idea of what the future is like affects what's going to happen much sooner than that future. Okay. And, people talk about the threats to humanity today. They talk about the climate change, resource exhaustion, meteor impacts, epidemics. Okay. But were any of those things the cause of the great disasters of the 20th century? No. Okay. The great disasters of the 20th century were not caused by climate change, resource exhaustion, epidemics, or meteor impacts. They were caused by bad ideas. And in particular, one bad idea in a number of different forms. And what that one bad idea is that there isn't enough to go around. Okay. That is the bad idea. And, 1912, General Friedrich von Bernhardi, and I talk about this in The Case for Space, writes a book, which is an international bestseller. In English, its title is Germany and the Next War. You can still actually get it on Kindle. And what he said was, look, there's only so much to go around. So who's going to get it? Who's going to get Eurasia? It's either going to be us, the Germans, or the Russians. So sooner or later, we're going to have to fight it out with them. And should it be sooner or later? Well, clearly sooner, because we got to destroy them before they industrialize. Okay. So 1914, they take advantage of the assassination of the Archduke as a pretext to force things into World War I. And then 1939, Hitler, even more hysterically, the laws of existence require uninterrupted killing so that the better may live. Germany needs living space. This is all nonsense. Germany never needed living space. Germany has much less space today than it had in the Third Reich, and a larger population and a vastly higher standard of living. And they did it without successfully stealing anyone else's land. Okay, let alone their cows. Okay, they did it against their judgment. Okay. By taking part in a global economy which expanded and advanced science and technology, which therefore advanced the productivity of every person on earth. And these advances were made by people of many nations, including, oh yes, some cases Germans, but in many cases people the Germans were trying to exterminate. And so they were completely wrong. Okay. And it was nonsense. And then today, I happen to know for a fact, because I've spoken to them, that there are people in the American national security establishment who believe that war with China is inevitable.
Yeah.
Why? Well, because there's 1.3 billion of them, and if they all start having cars like Westerners, there won't be enough oil in the world. Okay, so they've got to be knocked down. And you can bet that they have opposite numbers in Beijing who look at this problem from the opposite side of the chessboard and think essentially the same thing from the opposite point of view. Now, if this kind of thinking is allowed to prevail, there's going to be war, and it's going to be much worse than the wars of the 20th century because we have much more powerful weaponry. But it's wrong because, well, let's take China, for example. Why is China's standard of living rapidly advancing? It's because of technologies, like, say nothing of the latest things like internets and iPhones, but just electricity developed in the West. Okay. Yeah. But where did the West's advances come from? From technologies like paper and printing that have been invented in China. So, in fact, the real situation of humanity is not that of nations in a struggle for existence. It is of a somewhat bumptious family of nations in a collective effort to expand the human prospect through technological innovation. And in fact, it will be greatly to the benefit of Americans and other Westerners if China should fully develop, because then it means that there'll be vastly more scientists and engineers in the world. It means a much faster rate of invention and global technological progress. And so we're not enemies. Okay, we're just a family with a little competition going on. And but this prospect then, it's not that we're going to get oil from Mars. What we're going to get from Mars is the refutation of this pathological idea that we're enemies. Okay, and it's this idea that is the greatest threat to humanity. We are not threatened by there being too many people. We are threatened by people who think there are too many people, and we're not threatened by there not being enough resources to go around. We're threatened by people who think there aren't enough resources to go around and are going to be willing to do something about it. And so if we develop Mars, if we create new branches of human civilization in space, we will have proven that the thesis that there isn't enough to go around is just false, because as limited as the Earth may appear, it comes with an infinite sky, and it's wide.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's very much linked on what you just said. But when we do, I mean, assuming we do have colonies on Mars, I mean, how should they be administered? Should they be administered as kind of extensions of the current nation states on Earth, or should they be kind of administered as collectively in the same way that the International Space Station is, or should they be independent? I mean, how would that work? And how do we stop ourselves exporting the conflicts which have plagued Earth to space?
Well, I think that while initially space colonies might be administered from Earth, ultimately they will administer themselves. Now, I don't think there's any way around that. It will happen sooner or later. Now, what should be the form of government? That will be decided by them. And they may have a multitude of answers. Right now there's sort of two different utopian ideas that are current on Earth. I mean, putting aside certain pathological ones, but in terms of within the Western world, there's the social democratic idea and there's the libertarian idea. Okay, now they each have their advocates. I think they'll both be put to the test, and many others as well, no doubt. I mean, I don't think that the possibilities of human social thought is exhausted by the present age, and I think there's always going to be people who've got new ideas, and frequently will be very unpopular because they have divergent ideas from those that are generally accepted, and they're going to want to have a place they can go and try to cut their own path. And the ideas that work will succeed and they will be copied. The ideas that do not work will fail and they will not be copied. So if you have a Mars colony that offers people greater possibilities to realize their full human potential than anything they can find anywhere else, people will vote with their feet to go there. And so it will grow. And then it will become an example to the rest of humanity. And those that fail will obviously disappear, or those that, survive, but nevertheless in an unattractive state will be negative examples. And so, and I think this is going to be a tremendous influence on human progress. I mean, in Tudor England, there was this group of people around Richard Hakluyt, Walter Raleigh, Queen Elizabeth I, who formed this group called the New World Society. Yeah. And their idea was that in the New World, it could be a new world, okay, in which we could bring all the best and leave the worst behind. Yeah. And while they couldn't leave all the worst behind, to a remarkable extent, that program ultimately was realized. That is, okay, we've had religious prejudice in America, but we've never had religious persecution or religious wars. We certainly have class distinctions, but not blood nobility, and so forth. And the founders of the United States took the ideas of 18th century liberalism, which were well known among educated people in Europe, but which could not be implemented there because of power structures that were in place already. And they were able to give them a fuller try, what Thomas Jefferson called a noble experiment. And for all its flaws, it worked well enough that millions of people voted with their feet to come here. And you had this continental nation based on liberty created that not only demonstrated liberty, it demonstrated telegraphs and steamboats and centrally generated electric power and light bulbs and recorded sound and motion pictures and aeroplanes and nuclear power and computers and all this. And then to various extents was emulated first in the West and then even in non-Western countries like Japan. And I think that the Martian frontier is going to be a new place where new ideas can be put to the test, and where there's going to be tremendous emphasis on ingenuity to deal with new problems, and ingenuity in both technical areas and I think social areas. I think a lot of progress is being held up right now in the West due to red tape, due to excessive requirements to certify people before they could practice in various professions, which is limiting opportunity. In open frontier, one thing you always have in an open frontier is a labor shortage, and a labor shortage, therefore, is a bulldozer against obstacles to individuals to exercise their talent. Because in the early 19th century America, school teachers were men; they were typically clerics. But on the frontier, if a girl could read and do arithmetic, well, can she teach the school? Well, sure she can. Well, okay, we have no men who can do it. And then during our Civil War, that custom propagated eastward as the labor shortage. It's kind of what we call a Rosie the Riveter phenomenon. And so today, a woman who is a school teacher is not considered to be some kind of feminist icebreaker. It's considered to be a very normal sort of profession for a woman to have. But those opportunities were open to them by this labor shortage. Well, there's going to be nothing in shorter supply on the Martian frontier than human labor. And this is going to be a driver both for creation of labor-saving machinery, as it was on the American frontier, Yankee ingenuity and all that. But in this current age, robotics is the new form of labor-saving machinery, and even artificial intelligence, which allows a single individual to exercise a wider diversity of skills than they can, because you're going to have a labor shortage both in quantity and in diversity, okay, to try to make up the division of labor that is needed to have a full civilization.
Yeah. I mean, just one final question. It's quite a cheeky question. If we were to kind of fast forward to the year 2050, how much progress do you think we'd have made in terms of kind of establishing human civilization on Mars?
Well, I think that by 2050, there'll be over 1,000 people living on Mars. Okay, the Mars Society, our contest last year was to design 1,000-person Mars settlement, and this year it's to design a 1,000,000-person city-state. Okay, and so those are two distinct things, because one implies the seed of a new society, and the other is a new society, and and it's a difference between a seed and a sapling, at least. I think there'll be 1,000 people there or more. I think it'll be growing. I think you will begin to see the elements of a new culture. As even, Pilgrims landed in Massachusetts in 1620. Harvard is founded in 1638. And you already, by the 1650s, okay, Now, of course, the Massachusetts settlement was dominated by Puritans who were the Cromwell faction in England, and they had certain ideas, but those ideas included universal literacy, for example. Yeah. And so you had 90% literacy in Massachusetts in the mid 1600s, which is something very different than anything that existed in Europe at the time already. So I think we'll start to see things, start to see new customs, different ways people are regarded. As I say, you're certainly not going to want to impose, 4 or 8 years of certification on someone before you let them practice a profession which they're fully qualified to practice. Yeah. Because you're going to have so few people that can do it. And and maybe you'll start to see even beginnings of new dialect, new literature, certainly somewhat different sense of humor, perhaps. Just cultural differences will start to appear. So that's where I think we'll be, and it will be growing. When I say 1,000-person Mars settlement, I don't mean a static settlement of 1,000 people, something like McMurdo Sound in Antarctica. I'm talking about something that's actively growing. There will be children there. Okay, there will be people born on Mars. There will be schools on Mars. There will be community theaters and community orchestras on Mars. I think that the attitude that some people have today, that Mars is something that's there to be studied and therefore not changed, will be untenable. That people, they may establish the first base on Mars for scientific purposes, but once people are there and start having children, they don't exist to serve the purposes of others. They exist to serve their own purposes. And this is what life is. Life seeks its own purpose. So there will not only be a seed of a society on Mars, it will have sprouted its first leaves.
Well, Robert, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for your time. And so that's a nice optimistic note to end on.